hoping you'd tell me more about home.
Well, what would you like to know?
Well, do you have a family on K-Pax?
It doesn't work on K-Pax the same way it works here, Mark. On K-Pax, we don't have families in the way that you think of them. In fact, a family would be a non sequitur on our planet, as it would on most others.
In other words, you never knew your parents.
On K-Pax, children are not raised by their biological parents, Mark, but by everyone. They circulate among us, learning from one and then another.
Do you have a child?
No.
Do you have a wife waiting back for you on K-Pax?
Mark. You are not really listening to what I'm saying to you, are you? We do not have marriage on K-Pax. There are no wives. There are no husbands. There are no families.
I see. So, what about societal structure, government?
No, there's no need for one.
Well, you have no laws?
No laws, no lawyers.
How do you know right from wrong?
Every being in the universe knows right from wrong, Mark.
But what if someone did do something wrong, committed murder or a rape? How would you punish them?
Let me tell you something, Mark. You humans, most of you, subscribe to this policy of an eye for an eye, a life for a life, which is known throughout the universe for its stupidity. Even your Buddha and your Christ had quite a different vision, but nobody's paid much attention to them, not even the Buddhists or the Christians. You humans, sometimes it's hard to imagine how you've made it this far.
Hello and welcome to this edition of TZM Global Radio. I'm your host for today, James Phillips, from the UK chapter of the Zeitgeist Movement and TZM Education. Hope you're doing well out there, guys. The opening for today's show is a scene from the movie K-Pax. In this scene we have Kevin Spacey, who plays a character called Prote, who claims to be from an alien planet called K-Pax, being interviewed by a psychiatrist in the form of Jeff Bridges, asking about family and societal structure back on K-Pax. And I think the character Prote really delivers a huge logic bomb towards the sort of antiquated thinking that still unfortunately permeates modern culture, really shining through in the line at the end of that scene in which he simply can't understand how we've managed to get this far with the sort of thinking that we have. I still don't know how the hell we've managed anything like the sort of peace that even does exist on this planet to a certain degree with an economic system like the one we have. If anything, I think that proves quite the opposite to all of the people who talk about our nature, whatever that means, as a species being one of selfishness and greed, when you look around the world and look at all of the good things going on in it, despite the economic system we have. Then surely, if you were to make a claim about human nature, then given this particular set of circumstances, you would probably have to make the claim that we're empathic and collaborative, more than selfish, greedy and competitive. But I'm not making that claim. I'm just stating an observation. But nonetheless, people do seem to have, on the whole, in my experience, a rather despotic view of human nature and human behaviour in general. I suppose it's the old adage of the glass is half empty or the glass is half full type thinking. Of course, that particular phrase is a little bit spurious to say the least, because of course the glass is always full because half of it's air. And that you would need to know whether the glass was full and then emptied to halfway, or whether it was only ever filled up halfway. Then it would be half full if it was filled up halfway, and it would be half empty if it had just been emptied of the water it used to contain. If you're being particularly facetious, but I won't be today. So I really like that scene. I thought it's quite a good way to open, and actually I very often use the alien coming to Earth analogy in trying to explain what it is we advocate. I've found this is quite a good method. I say, the way I like to think about the world is, what would an alien from a developed civilization coming to visit Earth think about our different practices on this planet? Stick on amazing music, and I think anyone from anywhere in the universe is going to say, holy shit, you got that right. And then you pull out some random piece of paper called money with some dead person's face on it, or some king or queen who apparently feel that they are a more worthy member of your human family than you are, and you are, of course, their subject, for no other reason than the fact that you were born on a piece of mud with a load of people who believe that they're that king or queen's bitch, so now you have to be. And that kind of sums up our system of politics, if you will. But back to money, which is essentially an instrument to reward and allocate scarce resources to those who have more of these tokens, thus creating a hierarchy and a competitiveness amongst our species on this planet, which results in war and a retardation of the technology that we can use to better the lives of every man, woman and child on this planet. And we think that that's the best form of economics that we could really come up with as a species on this planet, really. I know we've discovered all these fantastic facts about our planet and how it works, our place in not only the solar system but our wider galaxy and also our universe. We have discovered fantastic things about the very small as well as the very large, been to our moon and learnt to cure all manner of sort of diseases that face our species. But somehow this money thing is really the best form of economics we could come up with. Yeah, a basically fictional entity based on faith that really requires everybody to use up our life-sustaining planetary resources as fast as we can, and frankly, the faster we do this, the better. Yeah, that's how we go about looking after each other on this planet. So, what do you think about that, Mr. Alien? Mr. Alien? Oh, he's left. Can't say I blame him. Can you? Also, something I wanted to talk about was the idea, or the philosophy, if you will, that's being portrayed in this scene, and as points towards has been portrayed by figures in the past, such as the Christ and the Buddha, is not a new one. It's a very old message, but we don't seem to have got it yet. Why? Because the physical reinforcing factors of our economic system are technically not in place to provide an access abundance for the world's population. It's really that simple. When you have an economic system that rewards and perpetuates scarcity, what do you expect? That is the simple and bottom line of the matter, I'm afraid. So it doesn't matter how many nice words you can string together about it. Until you've got that in place, you're engaging mostly in patchwork. But what it does show you is that if we are going to shift values and get this particular message out there, then there are those that are more primed to hear about it, potentially. I mean, as Jacques Fresco once put it with regards to Christianity, he said, I think it's a great idea, when are they going to put it into practice? And I really took that message this year and actually have just come back from trying to deliver it to a load of Christians at a Christian conference. Let me explain. My mum and my stepfather are Christians, and they take the grandchildren to a Christian festival once a year, a sort of camping festival, if you will. And for the last couple of years, they've invited me to go along to help look after the kids and give me a little break to just sit down and do some reading, basically, which is what I did the first year at least. But this year I went with a slightly different intention. I thought, you know what? I'm going to do what Fresco would do. And for the duration of my visit, I went to the sort of charity stalls section and pretended to be a Christian. And went up to all the stalls saying, why do you think charity exists? You know, you're here, you're doing charity, why do you think charity exists? And I got some interesting responses, usually whittling it down to the fact that our economic system doesn't work properly. And so I had some ready-made leaflets with some quotes from the Bible that have a sort of resource-based economy angle to them, if you will, and got discussing the idea. And I got some pretty good responses, people who were interested in the idea after we had a chat about the sorts of things Jesus would do, and a couple of interesting altercations, shall we say, when faced with one side of religious thinking that I cannot think that there's any way other than to attack this line of thinking, and that is, well, look, we're always going to live with the poor, we're always going to have poverty on this planet, there's always going to be suffering in this world because Satan is still in the world, and until Jesus comes back, it's not going to be resolved, so we should kind of wait for him to come back. And that was at the point where I just had to drop my whole I'm a Christian facade and just go, I'm sorry, I can't live with that idea. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but you seriously telling me it can't be a hell of a lot better before Christ comes back? I just had to say, what if you're wrong? What if you're wrong and there's a way by which 1 billion people do not have to starve to death on this planet, and you weren't prepared to listen to it? Do you really think if Jesus does come back, he's going to want to make room for you in heaven? I will admit that this, along with me actually at one point saying, so Satan's here on Earth, right? Yeah. And God invented everything, right? Including Satan. Yeah. So it's God's fault that there's evil shit going on in the world. Oh, no, it isn't. Well, no, clearly it is, because he created Satan. Had he not bothered doing that, he wouldn't fucking be here, would he? This betraying my my previous radio show on nonviolent communication. What can I say? Nobody's perfect. So I think it was kind of half successful, half not. I'm still pretty much sold on the idea of basically going in as a friendly face, or going in with the friendly attitude of saying, look, no one's trying to take your faith away from you. We couldn't do it if we wanted to. And in reality, what do we have to have first? We have to have a world not so dominated by religion, and then we can have an RBE, or can we get them on board to go forward with the RBE idea, at least to start off with? And then when we've solved all those problems they keep praying to solve, or doing charity to solve, then the only thing they'll be praying for is their own soul. And if they want to do that, then fine, let them do it. I don't care. But I'd rather actually functionally solve the problems that they can only pray for. In other words, I'd rather get them up off their knees and actually doing something, rather than waiting for divine intervention. I have to say I find that rather irritating, if I'm going to be honest. But anyway, that was my little plan there. I don't know what that will do for you guys out there, whether that might give you some ideas of how you might approach those of a more religious disposition around you, but I thought I would share it nonetheless. So, this show is dedicated to finishing the audiobook series for The First Civilization, something I've done for several radio shows, but today I'm actually going to bring it to a conclusion, which means that I'm going to get all the files together, uploaded and online in several different formats for an audiobook that should hopefully be released through all the movements, different channels and YouTube and alike. But I unfortunately didn't have time to get that done before this particular radio show, so I'll probably feature the information for where you can get your hands on that audiobook on the next show. Okay, without further ado, let's finish this audiobook. And so if you want to find it online by typing in The First Civilization, Jas Garcha, or through the movement's website, you can also find it as well, then please do so. And we're picking up from the bottom of page 64, entitled Leaping into the Unknown. Leaping into the Unknown. The purpose of the RBE experiment is twofold: to thoroughly test and refine the RBE concept until we have a well-functioning, versatile system, and to provide us with a physical reference to show the merits of an RBE in order to begin the transition. And this, of course, is the big scary question that has yet to be answered. How do we transition from our current system into an RBE? We can certainly speculate about how a transition might occur, but it's essentially impossible to plan a transition without having a concrete idea of the political and economic climate the coming decades will bring. Nonetheless, some general speculations can still be made. Perhaps one or more RBE micronations will form and thrive on the ocean, attracting new residents and inspiring the citizens of other countries to rise up against their current system. The wave of global protests which began in 2011 against the corruption and greed of contemporary society may very well be the beginning of such uprisings. Regardless of the scenario we find ourselves thrust into, we will inevitably face the same final task: convincing essentially the whole population of Earth to abandon the way of life that has dominated our planet for centuries and change to a system that is totally alien and strange to the majority of people. As difficult as this sounds, there is evidence that points to its plausibility. A recent study suggests that once an idea becomes a strong belief in approximately 10% of the population, that idea suddenly begins to spread rapidly to the majority. It seems that few people are comfortable holding an unpopular idea, but once an idea is touted by a decent proportion of the population, it becomes much more socially acceptable and so begins to grow in popularity very quickly. In other words, the notion of the RBE concept becoming a popular idea is not impossible. It merely needs to gain enough acceptance to hit the threshold of social acceptability, much like the popping of one's collar. So how do we go about ensuring that this happens? As I have stated a few times now, one of the best ways to convince people that they would benefit from a new idea is to show them concrete evidence of that idea's effectiveness. Displaying evidence has been one of the focal points of this transition plan. The constant stream of scientific information, the public tours, and the lives of the residents themselves are all ways to display to the public the qualities of life in an RBE. The information necessary to encourage the spread of this idea is very much present in this testing protocol, and so it is no stretch to predict that successful RBE experiments will encourage the public to adopt this idea. Remember, there is no need to directly convince every single individual in the world to support this idea. Once a reasonable minority offers their support for it, acceptance of the idea should begin to spread very quickly, all with the constant stream of evidence from the RBE experiments to provide support. However, even if we do reach a point where the RBE idea becomes very popular amongst the people of Earth, there is still the issue of overcoming the power structure that is already in place. Ideally, this would require nothing more than petitioning governments and organizations such as the UN to begin enacting reforms that will push us closer and closer to an RBE until a complete transition was completed. However, the notion that groups in power will so willingly give that power up is not very likely. Instead, resistance to change will almost certainly need to be met with resistance in turn. This is where actions such as boycotts, mass bank withdrawals, protests, occupation of public spaces, and other disruptive forms of non-violent resistance could be used to influence stubborn governments. Although I cannot give any explicit instructions as to how these tactics should be used to encourage the adoption of this idea, the combination of an established RBE micronation, scientific evidence supporting the benefits of living in an RBE, and the civil disobedience of an indignant population should be enough to encourage a very gradual transition to a resource-based economy. As I pointed out in the previous section, it is critical that this transition be gradual. We cannot expect that the human species as it is will be able to adopt a sudden transition of this magnitude due to the drastic change in values that will need to accompany this societal evolution. Based on the amount of time I've allotted to preparing for the experiment, 5 years, running the production facility, 2 to 5 years, establishing and testing the village, 5 years, and establishing and testing the full-scale colony, 2 years or more, the short-term goal of creating a successful RBE colony would take 14 to 17 years under ideal conditions. However, Since conditions are rarely ideal as we'd like them to be, I think a period of at least 25 years is more realistic. As for the long-term goal of global implementation, one can only wonder how long such a goal will take to reach, but it may very well require a large chunk of the 21st century. Although this is not entirely desirable due to the massive amount of suffering that will continue while the present system continues its ineffective reign, we would at least ensure that the human race has ample time to adjust their values to the new system. Indeed, simply achieving the short-term goal would take enough time for the birth of a new generation to occur. A generation that would grow up watching the RBE concept come to life and be constantly reminded of the contrast between life in that system and life in the system they were born into. This is the generation that will likely be responsible for pushing our species into a new way of life. Will capitalism hit the fan? Throughout the fabled digital realm known as the Internet, the RBE concept has often been coupled with the idea that a transition could only occur if the current system undergoes some kind of catastrophic collapse, forcing our species to re-evaluate our way of life and clearing the way for a new system to take the place of the old one. Indeed, some economists suggest that in the near future, technological advancement will result in the automation of so many jobs and a resulting explosion in unemployment and underemployment, that the average person will lack the purchasing power necessary to keep the market from collapsing. Others maintain that the market will quickly adapt to such a situation by creating new kinds of jobs that did not before exist, much like we've seen with previous technological revolutions. This debate is one that quickly becomes circular, and the most honest response that can be given is this: no one really knows for sure what's going to happen. Therefore, rather than argue one way or the other for a systemic collapse, I will instead ask a question of much more fundamental importance. Is the market system actually worth holding on to when technological advancement can render it obsolete? Let's think about this for a moment. Even if we can somehow prevent the downfall of capitalism, this would mean that we would still have a society in which the vast majority of people have to spend hours every day performing some activity they have no desire to perform in order to survive long enough to pursue activities they actually want to. Is this system really worth keeping in the face of one which people can pursue the activities they want to without sacrificing their time and social relationships? Does it make sense for us to continue forcing people into stressful competition with each other, thus encouraging the deterioration of personal and social health, when we have the technical capability to escape from this artificial battlefield? As usual, I will leave you to come up with your own answers to these questions, but all of the questions pertaining to this topic can really be boiled down to this: do we want to take full advantage of our increasing technological prowess, or do we want to continue compromising our use of technology in order to hold up an obsolete system? Whether a systemic collapse is imminent or not, it is in the best interest of our species to test the RBE system. If a collapse does occur, we might just have an example of a functioning system to fall back on and rescue us from whatever collapse occurs. If a collapse does not happen, we might nonetheless have created a superior system that can rescue us from the inadequacies of capitalism. If the RBE concept does turn out to function, and the evidence seems to indicate that it will, then it is critical that we have this idea at the ready as soon as possible. After all, even if we can somehow force capitalism to work, that is no indication that it will be a superior system to an RBE. Once again, I'll bring up the comparison of the horse-drawn carriage and automobile. Diligent effort, the horse and carriage might be able to get us to our desired destination, but we'll need to deal with a lot more horse crap than if we just took a car. The beginning of the beginning. Despite the fact that virtually all major advances throughout human history have been made through some form of scientific testing, this concept has never really been applied to the running of society. This is essentially what the entire RBE concept is. We identify a problem, scientifically determine the cause, come up with a hypothesis that addresses these problems, test said hypothesis, and then adjust the experiment repeatedly until we have found the parameters that result in a society that functions in the best way possible. And by best way possible, I mean a system that results in health, happiness, and freedom for the entirety of the human race, and efficiency and sustainability in our usage of Earth's resources. It's obvious that the transition plan I have outlined here is far from perfect. Like the RBE idea itself, there is certainly room for improvement. However, it makes little sense to discard a good idea because of a few issues, when we could instead attempt to address those issues and turn a good idea into an even greater reality. The complete abandonment of an idea should only occur once it has thoroughly proven itself to be fundamentally flawed, or if it is simply no longer applicable. It's for these reasons that I would have no problem with discarding capitalism, which is built upon the fundamental flaw of inequality and loses its applicability in a post-scarcity environment. From my perspective, what we are witnessing with the current wave of dissent against the system is the beginning of the first civilization. This historic event is a clear sign that the mentality of greed and selfishness that has defined so much of recorded human history is losing hold, and a new, socially and environmentally responsible global consciousness is emerging. We are witnessing the beginning of the first chapter in the story of true human civilization. I hope everyone is paying attention. Epilogue. Even if you take away all of the subjective, moral and ethical judgments that could be placed on contemporary society, there are still very objective reasons that it is no longer worth holding on to. Ultimately, it comes down to a few questions pertaining to the single most fundamental concern of any species: survival. Is it worth sacrificing our physical and mental health in order to pursue material junk, most of which does absolutely nothing to enhance our survivability? Does it make sense for us to sacrifice social relationships and relaxation time, both critical for our health, in order to spend more time performing purposeless tasks in the pursuit of fancy pieces of paper we call money? Is it worth sacrificing our health in order to pursue meaningless, intangible qualities such as pride and status? Is it beneficial for us to be drastically altering the environment that we depend on for our survival in order to ensure that the movement of our fancy pieces of paper continues at a desirable rate? And finally, is it worth putting the lives of the majority of our species in jeopardy so that a small percentage of our species can have access to far more material junk than what is required for them to live optimally healthy lives? From the perspective of an extraterrestrial visitor observing the Earth, our species would seem extremely confusing. All of the other species on the planet are concerned primarily with survival, yet our species is actively working towards its own destruction. To confuse our alien friend even more, it would also appear that we are fully aware of this fact, we just don't seem to be doing anything to change it. If insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over whilst expecting a different result, it would be obvious to our visitor that this species is completely off its rocker. There is a clear need for a massive shift in consciousness for this species. In order for humans to make it easier for us to understand things, we have a tendency to organize them into categories. This is very much apparent in the field of biology, where all life is organized into categorical hierarchy, from cells to tissues to organs to organisms to ecosystems and finally to the entire global biosphere. Perhaps the single most valuable lesson that I've ever learned is this: every substance, every cell, and every chemical reaction in our bodies depends entirely on every other substance, cell, and reaction. However, our bodies are not themselves isolated machines. They too depend on the environment around them in order to function properly. Therefore, in the truest sense, the concepts of you and I are simply artificial constructs that were put in place in order to make it easier for us to understand this complex thing we call life. In the most objective sense, there is no you or I. There is only one living thing on this planet, and that thing is the entire global biosphere. Every substance, every organism, and every action taken on this planet depends on every other substance, organism, and action. Every living thing on this planet is but one part of the biosphere, just like every cell in our body is but one part of us. In the same way, you cannot see each individual cell when looking at yourself in the mirror. We cannot see each individual organism when we look at our planet. The only thing that can be seen is the single, all-encompassing organism we call Earth. Perhaps this realization will be the cure to our insanity. However, in order for this cure to work, we must also stop reliving the errors of the past. Throughout history, virtually every society has made the mistake of thinking that they were the pinnacle of human achievement. Today, this tradition is alive and well. Most of our species cannot even fathom that there will be a time when modern society is considered primitive. Yet this change in thought has reoccurred throughout history. What will our descendants think of our current system 150,000 years from now? You might think this is a pointless question to ask. After all, what are the chances that humans will still be around by then? Well, consider the fact that modern sharks have been on this planet largely unchanged for about 100 million years. This is 500 times as long as our species has even existed. There is no reason why humans, in some form, could not also be around for a similar length of time. When we consider this, we realize that the time our species has existed thus far is incredibly short. What makes us think that we are even close to being as advanced as we could possibly be? How can we have the nerve to believe that today's civilization is anywhere close to what will one day be called civilized? What will be considered good or evil 1 million years in the future? How will we define success 100 million years in the future? One of the greatest hindrances of human progress throughout history has been the false assumption that the system presently in place is the best system that could possibly exist. In truth, there will always be an infinite number of ways to improve human society. This same logic applies to the resource-based economy idea as well. No matter how good we might think the RBE idea is, there is no reason to think that this system represents the end point of human progress. However, this is the area in which an RBE differs from all of the societies of the past and present. By taking full advantage of our increasing knowledge, we can create a system that recognizes its own shortcomings and the need for constant improvement. In an enlightened society, change would be embraced rather than feared. What we consider to be truth would continually evolve, along with the ever-evolving knowledge of our species. In order to become an intelligent civilization, we must first be able to accept our own stupidity. In doing so, we might at last be able to open our collective mind and actually start to learn something. The true potential of our species is still so far off that we cannot even begin to fathom what humans will ultimately be able to accomplish. There was a time when having a conversation with someone on the other side of the planet would have seemed impossible. Then we invented the telephone. We once thought it was impossible for humans to fly. Then we made airplanes. It was once considered impossible for a human to walk on the moon. Then humans walked on the moon. And now many of us think it's impossible to solve the problems of hunger, suffering, war, and human need. I think you can see where I'm going with this. If there is one thing that history has repeatedly taught us, it's that the word impossible has almost no meaning for our species. The more we have learned, the more the impossible has been proven to be possible. All it has ever required are two things: knowledge and the willingness to act on that knowledge. If I were to summarize all of the knowledge contained in this book, it would essentially boil down to this one statement. It makes logical sense for us all to love each other as equals, to live in peace and harmony with nature and with each other, and it is physically possible to accomplish all of this right now. There are no longer any logical reasons for us to delay the creation of such a world. Unfortunately, there will likely be many excuses. So what happens next? You've read this book, and you've heard my arguments. What do you do now? Quite simply, anything. Remember, you have knowledge of your own, and there is no reason for you to completely rely on this book. Whether you support the resource-based economy idea or you oppose it with every fibre of your being, you must act in order for change to occur. Think about how you might change and improve upon the ideas in this book. And if you come up with something, tell people about it. The success or failure of this idea depends entirely on the awareness of the population and our ability to come together in the pursuit of a common goal. Organisations such as the Venus Project, www.thevenusproject.com, the Zeitgeist Movement, www.thezeitgeistmovement.com, and the New Zealand Project, www.thenzp.com, are all dedicated to pursuing this new kind of society and might be good places to start looking for information and connections. However, the organisation or group is not of any real importance. What's important is the RBE idea itself. It doesn't matter if you choose to join one of these groups, choose to pursue this idea on your own, or choose to start your own organisation. All that matters is that something is being done. The best way for a great idea to fail is for people to fail to act on it. And so I'll leave you with this final statement from Mr. Fuller. Quote, "If humanity does not opt for integrity, we are through completely. It is absolutely touch and go. Each one of us could make the difference." Close quote. R. Buckminster Fuller. The future of our species is in your hands. What do you plan on doing about it? And that brings to an end the final reading from the First Civilization. And as I said, I plan on making this book available just as soon as I can, but life is going to take over for the next month or so. So I hope to be back with a radio show soon. Those last words of that book there really do sum up what the movement is about. And with that in mind, I would actually like to close with a little speech I wrote quite a while ago at the end of my first half of a presentation that I give. I may well repeat this speech at some point in the future, but I think it brings up the point of integrity quite well. So I'm going to read that and then leave you for today. So, here goes. Hopefully, the current state of human affairs should be such that you see that the institutions we have in place today only work on an extremely limited basis, if at all, and hopefully that should be enough for you to check out in the detail required our materials and take action. But sadly, sometimes that just isn't enough. We've become numb to the suffering portrayed through our televisions. We've become numb to the suffering felt by many of our human family across this beautiful planet that we all share. And when we stand up and say enough is enough, we are told that we are small and the system is big, and that change on a huge scale will not happen in our lifetime, and that it's better to be ignorant and live in bliss whilst the world crumbles around you. 'Cause hey, you've got a life to lead and things to achieve. What can little old you do anyway, huh? And you know what? They might just be right. But whoever said life was about achieving a finish line? It's a ride until the end, plain and simple. There are those who see things differently on the ride, but choose to hide from the action needed in the fear that striving to change the things that need changing would outcast them in the eyes of others, and that scares them so much that they choose to do nothing. Then there are those who see things differently and choose to strive to make the ride a better one for all, regardless of those in society who would ostracize them due to how unrealistic their aims seem from their limited perspective. Who, when they see injustice, fight it. Who, when encountered with violence, oppose it. Who, at the end of this ride, want to know that they did it right, and to hell with what others deem a worthwhile achievement. They don't live in fear of being outcast. They fight for what they believe in because it is right. They recognize that it's not a measure of one's sanity to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society, and they don't strive for some pot of imaginary gold at the end of a rainbow. They fight for what makes sense, and that is the pot of gold at the end of their rainbow. Ignorance is in fact not bliss, my friends. It's the last bastion of the beaten. As Mahatma Gandhi once said, be the light of change you wish to see in the world. Thanks, guys. Take care.